Hi guys, it's Mrs. Warren, a little bit later than usual. So we are up to chapter 3 in Guest. We just found out that Dado was not going to be coming home. Ma'am was going to try to take care of Guest as well as she could. And poor Molly, who was really sort of to blame for everything, she didn't know what she was going to do. So let's go ahead and get started. Dado didn't come home that morning, nor the next, nor the one after that. A week passed without news of him. Finally, one of the local men told Ma'am that Dado had gone to a distant village and found a job there as a farm laborer. He wouldn't return until the changeling was gone, in one way or another, he said. Even though it was my fault Dado had left, I was angry with him for abandoning Ma'am and me. Without Dado's wages, we had little to spend on flour and sugar. Ma'am grew too weak to do anything except to care for the changeling, so I cooked and made sure Ma'am ate, but it seemed the changeling was sucking the life out of her. While I milked the cow, weeded the garden, scrubbed the floor, and scoured pots, I wished the changeling would sicken and die. If I had the courage, I myself would have taken him to the crossroads while Ma'am slept. As the changeling's belly grew round, he cried less, but still far more than a human baby. When he was angry or hungry, he bit and kicked and pulled Ma'am's hair. No matter how badly he behaved, Ma'am spoke softly and kindly to him. She rocked him and nursed him and gave him a name, Guest, for that's what he was, a guest in our home who would return to his people one day as Thomas would return to us. So now we know how the title of the book got its title, how the title of the book came to be. I hoped it was the kind. Guest never smiled or laughed. He didn't gurgle or coo. When he wasn't crying, he lay in his cradle and scowled. Often he stared as cats do, at something only he could see. I hoped it was the kind folk he saw, coming and going in the cottage to make sure Ma'am treated their baby well. Surely they'd be pleased by his health. Someday soon they'd come with Thomas and trade him for Guest. Dado would return, and Ma'am would recover, and all would be as it was before. A year passed, summer and fall and winter and spring, and still the kind folk did not come. Guest outgrew the cradle, but he still did not stand or walk. Not one word did he speak. Even though he'd grown a few tiny yellow teeth, he wanted only milk. One morning, I stood at the garden gate with Guest in my arms. Pointing across the green fields to Mirkwood, I said, "That's where your true people are, but they don't want you. Nobody wants you. Not even Ma'am. Certainly not me. You're a wicked, soulless creature, and I long to be rid of you forever." It was wrong to say such things to Guest, but what did it matter? He understood nothing I said. He was more animal than human. A mongrel dog, maybe, the runt of a litter who should have been drowned at birth. I guess we really know how Molly feels about him. Guest's yellow eyes gleamed, but what lay in the shadows behind them I couldn't guess. Most likely, he hated me as much as I hated him. Turning his head, he gazed across the fields to Mirkwood, a blue shadow in the distance, and made a series of strange, harsh sounds. "Listen to you," I said. "Click, clack, click, clack. Is that all you can say? A beast is what you are." I felt a powerful urge to throttle him, to dash out his brains if he had any, to drown him in the water trough, to leave him at the crossroads. Granny was wrong. No matter how we treated the changeling, the kind ones would not bring Thomas back to us. The sound of harness bells interrupted my thoughts. I leaned over the gate and watched the peddler's horse come down the lane, pulling a cart heaped with the sort of things you never knew you needed until you saw them, and then you couldn't forget them. Shiny new pots and pans, bolts of bright cloth, shoes and boots, and hats, saws, hammers, barrels of nails, sacks of sugar, and smaller things like feathers, buttons, ribbons of all colors, spools of thread, combs, and pretty beads that sparkled in the sunlight. The peddler sat on his high seat behind the horse and waved when he saw me. He'd known me since I was a baby, and Mam and Daddo long before that. If he had a name other than Peddler, we'd never known it. But he came every month or so, and he knew the name of everyone in the village and on the farms. He wore the same old blue coat, long and faded and patched here and there with bits of cloth that didn't match. On his head was a shapeless yellow hat with a crow's feather stuck in its band, a nose the size and shape of a carrot, but more red than orange, jutted from his face, and a bushy gray beard and drooping mustache hid his mouth. Halting at our gate, the old man smiled down at me. "Here's pretty Molly Cloverall, who needs silk ribbons for her hair, and perhaps a string of green beads to match her eyes, or maybe even a bouquet of flowers to give her ma'am." Guest leaned toward the peddler and sniffed, as if puzzled by his smell. I couldn't tell if he liked the smell or not, but it was the most interest Guest had shown in anything except milk. The peddler laughed. My, but you've got an ugly wee brother there, sniffing me more like a pup than a baby." I scowled at the insult. Surely the peddler could see Guest was no relation to me. "He's not my brother." "Well now, if he's not your brother, who is he?" Unwilling to admit what Guest was, I said, "A band of travelers left him at the gate. Left him in our garden." The peddler scrutinized Guest, leaning so close I thought he might sniff the changeling like a dog himself. "He don't look like a traveler's baby." "Perhaps that's why they left him here." I was getting so annoyed with the peddler's comments. "He's so ugly and mean and nasty. They didn't want him, and neither do I." Guest turned his yellow eyes to me as he done before, and the old man said, "I believe he likes you more than you like him." "He doesn't like anyone, and what's it to you anyway?" In a huff, I walked into the cottage without looking back. The peddler called after me, "Does this mean you won't be needing ribbons, beads, or flowers?" My answer was to slam the door behind me. Dumping Guest in the cradle, I ran to the window and peeked out. All I saw of the peddler was his back as he drove away. I wanted the ribbons and the beads and the bouquet for Mam, but the peddler was entirely too nosy, him and his feather and his cap and his sly eyes. And truth to tell, Mam had no coins to spare on frippery. So I think we talked about this in class. We said that we figured out that frippery must mean things that you don't really need that you would just like to have, because remember, Daddo wasn't there, so they weren't getting his money, so they didn't have very much money to spend on anything besides food. That afternoon, Granny Hedgepath came by. Before she crossed the threshold, I hid in the loft. I didn't want to see her or hear what she might say to me, but I did want to eavesdrop on what she said to Mam. I lay flat on the floor and pressed my ear to a knothole. "I brought more of my..." Sorry, now I'm Granny Hedgepath. "I brought more of my elixir to strengthen you," Granny said. "Is it helping you, Agnes?" "All that will help me," Mam said, "is to hold Thomas in my arms again." Granny mumbled something, and Mam said, "See how this one is grown? Have I not been good to him? Have I not been kind?" "You've been more than good and better than kind," Granny told her. "Then tell me, why don't they come for him? My milk has put fat on his bones and taken it from my bones. He rarely cries now. He sleeps at night and wakes at dawn." "But he doesn't talk or walk or even stand up like a proper young one. Why shouldn't they want him when they have yours?" "But you said if I treated him well..." "I said perhaps, Agnes Cloverall. Perhaps they'd take this one back and return yours." Guest began to wail so loudly that I covered my ears. "Perhaps," Mom hissed. "I've devoted myself to this creature for over a year. I've lost my husband and my strength, and you tell me perhaps?" "I said perhaps from the very start, and I still say it. We don't know what the kind folk will do. There's no understanding them. They're not like us. If that's all the comfort you can give me, then you might as well leave me to suffer." There was a brief silence. Then Granny said, "So be it, Agnes. Truly, I have done all I can. But I urge you to go on caring for the changeling. You never know what might happen. There's still hope." "I am weary of waiting and hoping. Just go and leave me be." "Good day to you then." The door closed and Mam began to sob, which is another word for cry. I stayed where I was, thinking she might not want me to see her crying. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the loft small window, bringing with it the smell of hay, the sound of birdsong, and the heat of summer. I watched bits of dust danced in the shaft of light and thought about Mam's longing to have Thomas back. What if I took Guest away and went in search of Thomas? Suppose I found the kind folk and persuaded them to take Guest and give me Thomas. Surely they'd see Mam had treated Guest well. Wasn't it possible they had some kindness in their hearts? But how was I to find the kind ones? They might be across the sea and far away. Then again, they might just be over the next hill. Those ones traveled here and there in the dark lands, sometimes staying in one place and sometimes in another. The villagers said the kind folk did not want to be found, but had anyone been brave enough to see them? Perhaps in old tales there were those who did, but not in our ordinary life, and certainly not girls like me. Truth to tell, it scared me to think of going off on my own. I'd never been farther from home than Lower Hexham, just a mile down the road. On the other side of the village was Mirkwood, where even the bravest boys dared not go. And beyond Mirkwood were the Darklands. If it hadn't been for me, my brother would be in Mam's arms and Dado would be smoking his pipe in the garden, and the changeling would be, well, wherever he should be, and definitely not here. So no matter how scared I was, I had to make things right. Me, Molly Cloverall, all by myself, I would rescue my baby brother. I found Mam downstairs, nursing Guest. Too sad and weary to turn her head, she didn't notice me, but the changeling gazed at me with his yellow eyes, as watchful as a cat. "Soon you'll be gone," I mouthed at him, "you hateful thing." He closed his eyes and gave all of his attention to Mam and the milk he took from her. "I'll fix supper, Mam," I said. "Is there anything you'd like to eat?" Still without really seeing me, she shook her head. "I haven't got much of an appetite." After she had eaten a bit of bread and half a bowl of soup, she lay down on her bed. For once, Guest was sleeping, and I was glad to see Mam using the time to rest. After supper, I pumped a pail of water from the well and washed the dishes. When the kitchen was clean and tidy, I went outside and stood by the gate. Across the fields, Mirkwood lay deep in the shadow. Birds chirped in the hedgerows, and tall stalks of purple foxgloves swayed gently, still humming with the last of the day's bees. The moon had already risen, pale-faced in the sky, almost full. The smell of wet grass sweetened the air. In the distance, farm workers trudged home, their voices and laughter barely audible, which means they could barely hear them. Dado should have been with them, but he was far away, working in unknown fields with strangers. Gripping the gate with both hands, I wished on the first star of the night, "Please let me find the kind folk. Please let them take Guest and return Thomas. Please let me bring him home safely. Please let Dado return and Mam laugh and be happy. Please, oh please, 1,000 times please, let everything be the same as it was before." Okay, and so that is the end of chapter 3. So I'll see you guys tomorrow with chapter 4. Take care and have a good night.